Hey friends, welcome or welcome back. My name is Shannon, and today we are going to continue with a series that I've been doing where I blame factors other than myself for my book purchases. And today I'm blaming Jane Austen. Jane Austen made me buy these books. Now, this is all in good fun. I am fully responsible for my financial decisions and any books that I bring into my collection. So don't come at me. We're just having a little fun here. We're going to start with The Female Quixote, or The Adventures of Arabella by Charlotte Lennox. This was published in the 1750s, and this book is kind of like a little parody of Miguel de Cervantes' Don Quixote. And in this book, we follow Arabella, who grows up isolated in the country where she reads lots of romance books to learn about the world. Now, this is romance with a capital R, not romance as we know today. The Stowe's stories, romance with a capital R, were more adventure stories, chivalry stories, and almost fantastical stories. Just, I don't want to call it speculative fiction, but things that actually wouldn't happen in the real world. Those were romance stories as people in the 1700s would know them. So Arabella thinks that life is exactly like her romance adventure novels and ends up going through life making poor decisions. Does that sound a little familiar? Well, kind of sounds a little bit like Northanger Abbey, doesn't it? Similar to Northanger Abbey, The Female Quixote was intended to satirize the critics who felt that young women were endangered by novel reading. We know that Austen read this book at least twice, and that's because in a letter to her sister Cassandra in 1807, she writes, "The Female Quixote now makes our evening amusement. To me, a very high one, as I find the work quite equal to what I remembered it." So she obviously had already read it prior to 1807. And it's quite possible that she read it for the first time prior to writing Northanger Abbey in the late 1700s. So she may or may not have been inspired to write Northanger Abbey because of The Female Quixote. I actually cannot wait to read this and then go back to Northanger Abbey to see the possible similarities. Next, we have Waverley by Sir Walter Scott. This was published anonymously in 1814, and it's a historical novel set in Scotland during the 1745 Jacobite uprising. Edward Waverley is a young Englishman commissioned to a Scottish regiment when he discovers friends who are sympathetic to Charles Stuart, who was the exiled Stuart prince. Waverley finds himself having to choose between his loyalty to the crown and his admiration for the Jacobite cause. This was Scott's first prose fiction book, having already been very famous as a poet. However, it was actually an open secret that Scott was the author. And Waverley is credited with being the first historical fiction novel as we know the genre today. Now, we know that Austen definitely intended on reading it because in 1814, she wrote to her niece Anna, "Walter Scott has no business to write novels, especially good ones. It is not fair. He has fame and profit enough as a poet and should not be taking the bread out of the mouths of other people. I do not like him and do not mean to like Waverley if I can help it, but fear I must." So I hope she read it and I hope she liked it. And I wonder what she said about it when she did finally get around to reading it. She then continues in this same letter to say, "I have made up my mind to like no novels really, but Miss Edgeworth's, yours and my own." So that brings me to Belinda by Maria Edgeworth, the Miss Edgeworth referenced in that letter to Anna in 1814. Belinda is a novel specifically called out in Northanger Abbey. And here's the quote. "Oh, it is only a novel," replies the young lady, while she lays down her book with affected indifference or momentary shame. "It is only Cecilia, Camilla, or Belinda. In short, only some work in which the greatest powers of the mind are displayed, in which the most thorough knowledge of human nature, the happiest delineation of its varieties, the liveliest effusions of wit and humor are conveyed to the world in the best chosen language. Cecilia and Camilla, the other two reference novels in that passage, are by Frances Burney, and they are not on today's list because I've actually had copies of those two books for like 20 years, and I have read one of them, while Belinda was purchased within the last year. Belinda was published in 1801 and is a typical courtship novel where we have a young girl, Belinda, coming into society for the first time, hoping for a good marriage. So we know that Edgeworth is Austen's favorite novelist. I mean, she says it in 1814 to her niece Anna, and it would have probably gratified Austen to know that Edgeworth had read nearly all of Austen's books, if not all. So Edgeworth's private correspondence was published in the 1860s, approximately 50 years after Austen had died. And we know that she liked Mansfield Park and Pride and Prejudice, but she had very mixed feelings about Emma and Northanger Abbey. But it doesn't appear that any Edgeworth's recorded comments survive about how she felt about seeing Austen reference Belinda in Northanger Abbey. So we unfortunately don't know what she thought about it. And it wouldn't have mattered because Northanger Abbey was published after Austen had died. So even if Maria Edgeworth had said something about it, Austen wouldn't have known because she had already passed away. Another novel referenced in Northanger Abbey is The Monk by Matthew Gregory Lewis. In Northanger Abbey, heroine Kathleen Morland tries to talk to the boorish John Thorpe about books, and here's what he says. Novels are so full of nonsense and stuff. There has not been a tolerably decent one come out since Tom Jones, except The Monk. I read that the other day, but as for all the others, they are the stupidest things in creation. Tom Jones is a novel by Henry Fielding. I have a copy of that, but that's not on today's list because I did not purchase it because of Northanger Abbey. Now, The Monk, which John Thorpe apparently likes, is a Gothic novel published in 1796. And in this book, we follow a very virtuous monk named Ambrosio, who decides to give in to his lustful and violent urges, thus setting off events that essentially leave him damned. So this is essentially a Gothic turned horror story, and there's lots of violence, rape, and incest in this book. And it was immensely popular at the time, and also controversial for the very reason of its content. And I've heard that some people who read it today still think it's shocking. So if it was, most of the times we think, things that were shocking to people in the 1700s are pretty mild to us today. But from what I gather, people who have read it recently, it's still pretty darn shocking. So maybe trigger warnings for The Monk. So from what I understand, Lewis later on in life actually censored later versions of The Monk. Basically, he was 19 when it was published. And when he got older, he probably just decided that his youthful writings were in poor taste. I don't know, but I am definitely intrigued in reading this book. Keeping on with Northanger Abbey and the Gothic novel, we have The Mysteries of Udolpho by Anne Radcliffe. Now, this book makes a hefty appearance in Northanger Abbey, and Catherine is actually reading it throughout Northanger Abbey and referencing it often. So in that same conversation with John Thorpe about novels, after he says that novels are the stupidest things in creation, Catherine replies, I think you must like Udolpho if you were to read it. It is so very interesting. Not I, Faith. No, if I read any, it shall be Mrs. Radcliffe's. Her novels are amusing enough. They are worth reading, some fun and nature in them. Udolpho was written by Mrs. Radcliffe, said Catherine, with some hesitation, from the fear of mortifying him. So John Thorpe has no idea what he's doing. And then prior to this conversation with John Thorpe, Catherine is discussing Udolpho with John's sister, Isabella Thorpe. And Isabella says, but my dearest Catherine, what have you been doing with yourself all this morning? Have you gone on with Udolpho? Yes, I have been reading it ever since I woke, and I'm got to the Black Veil. Are you indeed? How delightful. Oh, I would not tell you what is behind the black veil for the world. Are you not wild to know? Oh, yes, quite. What can it be? But do not tell me. I would not be told upon any account. I know it must be a skeleton. I am sure it is Laurentina's skeleton. So we've got lots of black veils and skeletons and dark castles happening in Mysteries of Udolpho. So Anne Radcliffe didn't create the Gothic novel, but she essentially perfected it, and The Mysteries of Udolpho is pretty much cited as the quintessential Gothic novel, essentially cementing Gothic novels into their own special genre. At the time this was published, it kind of wasn't his own genre yet. This was published in 1794, and we follow Emily St. Aubert, who suffers from the death of both of her parents, some supernatural terrors in an Italian castle, poisonings, kidnappings, imprisonments, and an evil man hell-bent on getting what he wants from her. So very dramatic, and yes, most likely melodramatic. One thing to note in these Gothic romances, remember, romance with a capital R, written by women, is that they often have heroines who have no power and are captives to men. These heroines are not permitted to make their own choices, just like women of Radcliffe's and Austen's time. So, something to think about when you're reading these melodramatic Gothic novels, specifically the ones written by women. Keeping on with my girl Anne Radcliffe, we have The Romance of the Forest by Anne Radcliffe. So this one was not referenced in Northanger Abbey. We are now moving to Emma. And in Emma, Emma is grilling Harriet Smith on Robert Martin, who is a local farmer that Harriet appears to like, asking her whether Robert Martin is a man of information beyond the line of his own business. Basically, does he read anything other than farming stuff? And Harriet says, I know he has read The Vicar of Wakefield. He never read The Romance of the Forest, nor The Children of the Abbey. He had never heard of such books before, I mentioned them, but he is determined to get them now as soon as ever he can. So The Vicar of Wakefield is a book by Oliver Goldsmith, and that is a satirical novel based on the book of Job. I actually don't have that book, and at this time I'm not interested in reading it, but maybe in the future. And The Children of the Abbey is a Gothic novel by Regina Maria Roach. Not, I haven't purchased that either. It's not something that I'm currently interested in. But I am interested in The Romance of the Forest, which was published in 1791 before The Mysteries of Udolpho. And in this one, we're following Adeline escaping a man thought to be her father and finds herself in a dark abbey in the forest, I think, that may or may not be haunted. And then she becomes an object of prey to the man that's supposed to be protecting her. Basically, another woman with no agency and terrors that ensue when one has no ability to make choices for oneself. And from what I understand, there's like a lot of nature writing in here. So we'll see whether I enjoy that. All right, so now we're leaving Emma and we're moving into Mansfield Park. So these next two selections are from Mansfield Park. And the first being Lover's Vows by Elizabeth Inchbald, which this play is used as a major plot device in Mansfield Park. So the young people want to put on a play to, while away the time, but nobody can think of anything appropriate to do. Then they settle upon Lover's Vows, which is a completely inappropriate play. At least it is to Fanny and Edmund. It's not to anyone else. Tom Bertram says, Lover's Vows. And why should not Lover's Vows do for us as well as the Ravenshaws? How came it never to be thought of before? It strikes me as if it would do exactly. Lover's Vows was published and performed in 1798, and it is an adaptation of an earlier German play called Das Kinderlieb, which is literally translated as The Love Child. And in this play, we are following Agatha and Frederick, who are mother and son, after Frederick comes back from the military to find that his mother's starving. And then it's revealed that Frederick is the illegitimate child, Agatha having been seduced by a wealthy baron when she was 17 years old, who promised to marry her and then didn't. Frederick is resolved to help his mother, and he goes out to beg for money and then runs into the Baron, not realizing that it's his father, and the play ensues from there. The play was originally produced and performed at the Covent Garden Theatre for 42 nights, making it a very successful production. And with the topic of sex outside of marriage and an illegitimate child, it's not surprising that Fanny and Edmund were not really thrilled with this selection. But Austen uses this play masterfully in Mansfield Park to mirror the Mansfield Park characters and kind of foreshadow things to come. So the last selection here that Jane Austen made me buy is also from Mansfield Park, and this is Henry VIII by William Shakespeare. Now, I've read and seen plenty of Shakespeare. I've even performed in Much Ado About Nothing twice. But you're thinking, so why did Jane Austen make you buy Henry VIII? Well, I've actually never had any interest in reading Shakespeare's histories, which is kind of funny because I love historical biographies, and I love reading about kings and queens of Britain, and I have an absolute love for the Tudor period, but I've actually just never had any interest in reading Shakespeare's histories. But there is a great passage in Mansfield Park while Mr. Crawford is trying to woo Fanny, and Lady Bertram asks him to read something, and Fanny is mesmerized by his reading. But taste was too strong in her. She could not abstract her mind 5 minutes. She was forced to listen. His reading was capital, and her pleasure in good reading extreme. To good reading, however, she had long been used. Her uncle read well, her cousins all, Edmund very well, but in Mr. Crawford's reading there was a variety of excellence beyond what she had ever met with. The king, the queen, Buckingham, Wolsey, Cromwell, all were given in turn. It was truly dramatic. So we know that that Crawford is reading Henry VIII just by the fact of the characters mentioned. And then in this same passage, we're actually brought back to Lover's Vows, where she's remembering the shenanigans that happened while the young people were putting on this play. His acting had first taught Fanny what pleasure a play might give, and his reading brought all his acting before her again. Nay, perhaps with greater enjoyment, for it came unexpectedly, and with no such drawback as she had been used to suffer in seeing him on the stage with Miss Bertram. So I'm going to check out Henry VIII by William Shakespeare. Jane Austen made me buy it because otherwise I just would stick with Shakespeare's comedies and tragedies and just ignore the histories. So that's it for the selections that Jane Austen made me buy. But as I was preparing my notes and getting ready to film this video, one of my pre-orders came in, and I'm so excited about it. And this is Jane Austen's Bookshelf, A Rare Collector's Quest to Find the Women Writers Who Shaped a Legend by Rebecca Romney. So Romney is a rare book dealer, and one day she comes across an edition of Evelina by Frances Burney. Remember, I mentioned Frances Burney earlier on. And Burney was an author that Romney had heard of, but really didn't know much about. So she went about learning more and was surprised to learn that the term Pride and Prejudice came from Burney's novel Cecilia. If you remember, Cecilia is specifically called out in Northanger Abbey. And if you ever read Jane Austen's letters, you will see that she references Cecilia and Camilla, I believe, several times throughout her letters. So we know that Jane Austen really enjoyed Frances Burney. But Romney, who was an avid Austen reader, was intrigued. She hadn't realized the connection between Austen and this supposedly random author from the late 1700s that apparently inspired Jane Austen. And this book goes through Romney's quest to learn more about the female writers that Jane would have known about and read, and to find out, firstly, how they may have inspired Jane Austen's writing, and then most importantly, why these particular female authors were not part of the canon. Everyone considers Jane Austen as one of the earliest and best English novelists, but there were so many women that came before her. And Romney wanted to know, why are they not read as consistently or studied as regularly today as Jane Austen? How did they fall out of the Western canon? She wants to know. So in this book, Romney covers 5 of the authors that I've already mentioned in this video: Frances Burney, Charlotte Lennox, Anne Radcliffe, Maria Edgeworth, and Elizabeth Inchbald. And then there are a couple of other authors she covers that I didn't mention here, and that's Hannah More, Charlotte Smith, and Hester Lynch Thrale Piozzi. I actually read this book the moment it arrived, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I will be talking about it more in a separate video, but I thought the timing was just too perfect in connection with this video. So that is it. That's all I have for you today. A whole bunch of books that Jane Austen made me buy. I had no choice. I had to get them. I know that she read them. I know that she talked about them in her books, and I wanted them in my collection. So have you read any of these? Let me know. I would love to hear from you. Thank you so much for joining, and have a great day. Bye.